Please join me in welcoming to the stage my two amazing presenters, Pepper Miller and Dawn V. Carr.
Thank you. Good morning, good morning. I am Pepper Miller. I am a market researcher, qualitative researcher, and I help large companies understand Black America. I am passionate about helping brands, researchers, and society understand the value of Black as a people as well as a market segment.
Yeah, and I'm Dawn Carr, and I am the owner of Mahogany Insights, and our focus is to help brands and companies connect more authentically with Black consumers. And I am passionate about this because I feel like we have the most important job in creating reflection of anyone, right? We're the market researchers that help marketers and advertisers make the decisions that really reflect what the rest of the world does. And I think that it's important that we get to do that together. So
yeah,
I'm
so excited. Yeah.
This is so exciting, y'all.
That we get to do this.
Okay.
So Black people, Black America is a formidable segment. 47.2 million people. We have $1.6 trillion spending power. That's after-tax disposable spending power. Most of us live in the South, and we still live in major markets. We're young and influential, more so than the white consumers. And in spite of everything that Black people have gone to, we're still here. Yeah. And we remain profoundly resilient and enduringly optimistic.
Yeah. This is like such a key point, this resiliency and optimism. You hear this so much in any of the consumer insights that you have. No matter what, they feel personally optimistic about what they can control, even though they may not feel optimistic about what the rest of the world is doing.
Thank you, Dawn. So there are a number of blind spots that business leaders have when it comes to Black America. And we are sharing with you 7 of those blind spots. And what's interesting, too, about these blind spots is that they're also insights for connection and engagement if you're a marketer and if you're a market researcher. We don't have time to go through all of them, but I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. The most important insight is number 1 for a reason, is the fact that we need to understand America's unbridled history, Black America's unbridled history in particular, because all of our beliefs and behaviors ladder up to it. Like, for example, code switching. Right. We talk about code switching a lot. So Black people code switch not because they want to speak to each other in Ebonics, but because they want non-Black people to feel comfortable with them. This historical lens defines how Black people see themselves and how they perceive how others see us. It is so important to understand characteristics, beliefs, and behavior, they all ladder back up to it.
Yeah, and I think with that, so there's been this trend now that instead of doing like Black-specific research and Hispanic-specific research, we sort of do research with everyone and we maybe over-recruit. And this piece here, I think, is such a critical piece because how your Black respondents will behave if they walk into a room and they're one of 2, that might be an over-recruit out of 6, is very different than how they will behave if they're in a room where they are collectively together. So there are, 4 out of the 6 or 6 out of the 6. So you might get technically the same answers, but the way in which they speak about it, the passion, the language, the authenticity will change simply because of this code switching. And so you've got to be able to understand when is it right to be able to say that 2 out of 6 is okay, and when do you actually need like more you need that entire 6 group.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about designated research because you're right. We tell the truth, but we don't always tell the whole truth.
Yep, perfect. So what I love to talk about, as my former background is in brand, is in this idea of gaps, because I feel like sometimes it's really hard to know when does it make sense to invest in this group. And so what we try to do with clients is say, like, there's a big gap in terms of money with these consumers. In fact, I think McKinsey puts that gap at about $300 billion. That is specifically due to the fact that Black consumers are not purchasing at the level in which they should, or the products in which they should or want to purchase. So we call this that $300 billion gap. And every brand probably has an opportunity to get a piece of that. So what we try to do is help brands identify, do you have a gap? Because if you do, then this consumer segment is really important. And also, how do you close it? I think this is often the lowest hanging fruit. Like if you were often looking at how do I close a gap in my business. You're trying to come up with these new ideas and things like that. But sometimes like your gap is just to get the people who are already buying you to buy you a little bit more. So if you can identify what that looks like, that's a huge opportunity. So we often look at it between two gaps, category gaps and brand gaps. We'll ask clients if you have access to this information already through Nielsen, Circana, IRI, et cetera. Sometimes you can pull a household panel data to look at how many households are you in with Black consumers, and then what's your share? And if there's a gap there, there's an opportunity. And the same with brand gaps. How's your brand performing against others? It's a really quick test that you can do to even see if you have this. And sometimes we do this in lunch and learns. People pull it immediately and they're so shocked at how many households that they're in and why, in fact, they may not be seeing the sales reflected there. Big opportunity. We've talked a little bit about what this gap really looks like. I sort of talk about it from minding the gap, which is like, oh, we don't want to step on any toes, we don't want to offend things, to mining the gap, that there's opportunity here. And if you can understand what it is that consumers really need and want and how these Black consumers may be using your product that's different, there's an opportunity that's a big one. I love this quote down here. This is actually an article by Mark Pritchard, who's CMO from P&G, and he talks about how for them at P&G, multicultural marketing is mainstream, and it's for this reason about this gap, right? They found that it's about $500 million in sales if they in the U.S. alone, if they could just close the gaps they have with their consumers, and so that's why they focus on this.
So when we think about closing the gap, a big part of it is focusing on and learning from African Americans. So we've learned like those 7 insights that we talked about, and it's too bad we didn't have enough time to go into them because they're so interesting. But we have learned that Black insight succeeds both Black and mainstream when Black perspectives are understood, when we understand that history, when we understand this identity that's important to us. We understand that we're not post-racial because we have a Don Carr. And so learning from this disadvantaged segment, getting it right with mainstream, when you get it right with Black people, you get it right with mainstream. So let's look at some examples of what has happened. So not understanding the Black consumer, one of the things that has happened is because we speak English, many brands and researchers have a tendency, as Dawn was saying, to roll us in with mainstream. The rhetorical question is, they speak English, don't they? That's really a rationale for not investing in Black research, not investing in Black marketing, and not investing in Black media. And so as a result of that, we continue to see brands making these mistakes. And these are just a few of them. There's so many more that is happening behind the scenes, like H&M, Coolest Monkey in the Jungle. Many of you have seen that. Gucci lip sweater, Kendall Jenner and Pepsi. That was, what's the word? Anyway. And Mary J. Blige dancing on the stage of Burger King at a Burger King restaurant. And then the Vogue International cover where they featured these African models from Africa, which was a great idea.
Right.
But they clothed them all in Black. They gave them somber looks, and the women all wore straight hair. Nobody had natural hair, and it was so counter to African culture, which is upbeat and vibrant, despite some of the challenges that Africa has.
And I think like a build on this is that sometimes it's the things we don't understand, which is why like we feel it's so important to have representation, not just in the front room, but in the back room, and particularly in analysis. So I'll give you a recent example where we were doing research specifically to understand how, think about the workplace and how things are different in the workplaces and all of that. And we were working with a product. And coming out of that research, what Black women and Black men were saying is that, you know, what I really want that could help me get further along in my career is to be seen.
Exactly.
To be represented, to feel like I am getting the invitations that I need. That's a big part of it. But what the product, what the client wanted to hear is like, but what's the thing? Like, what's the functionality that I can actually change? And I kind of liken this to this idea of like, you're asking about, do you want steak or chicken for dinner? And they're saying that no one ever brings me a plate. And so you're asking and you're trying to force this conversation, but in reality, you have to understand what the real barrier is so you can actually figure out how you solve for that and that sort of difference. And that idea of like, they didn't really even get that there are people who actually don't feel like they're getting a plate.
Right.
Because that isn't something that necessarily everyone sort of has to deal with. So having that representation, I think, is really important.
Yes, I speak English.
Yeah.
But are you talking to me?
Yeah, and so we kind of talk about this through the lens of a framework, because I think this idea of what authenticity means when we're talking about Black consumers in particular, people always come to us and ask us that. And I think one of the big things is that it is more than just, do you have the right representation in your advertising? At that point, that's like one piece, probably a little bit too late by the time you get to that piece. There are these other pieces that are important as we look at it. And so we sort of talk about this, and when you look at brands that consumers say make them feel that they're authentically connected with them, they have three things in common. The first is that they make them feel seen. And so there is a piece to that. That is not just about you regurgitating what they say, but that the way and the manner in which you're talking about the way your brand delivers speaks to them in a way that feels authentically seen and heard to them. There's a lot of empathy that goes into that. The second is around invest. We capitalize the vest because this is about long-term commitment if you think about investing in something. And so wanting to make sure that you're not just there in the community for a short term to go run some ads or go give a donation and then go get immediate response, but you're there over time, even if it's just a little bit. That's authentically connecting. And then the final thing is about empowering. Like, it is about that. We talked about the resiliency and the fact that optimism, they feel in control, and you have to make sure that that control stays there. So that idea of empowering.
So when we think about being seen, it's about positive realism too. And positive realism is about showcasing Black people the way we really live in a normal way. What comes up a lot in our focus groups with Black people is, why can't they show us normal? Why can't they just, show us in a normal way, enjoying our family, showing us as good people, showing us as safe people, showing us as loving people, showing us as productive people. And so this is an example of positive realism and leading with Black insights is Rihanna when she launched her Fenty makeup line. She revolutionized the beauty industry by doing so, because what she did was she brought 40 plus shades of makeup in retail. That had never been done before. And one of the things that we learned is that Maybelline, Lancome, also had 40 plus shades of makeup. So they learned from Rihanna, and then they followed suit, and they saw positive results. When you get it right with Black people, you get it right with mainstream. Next.
Yeah.
So you want to?
Yeah, I mean, so this is another example with Nike. So kind of that same idea when you look at it through this lens. Nike is probably the only brand that comes up consistently when you ask Black people who connects authentically. And I think they do these three elements very well. The first thing in this idea of having them feel seen. So this idea that, like, in this particular ad, right, this is the one about girls. I always have a hard time reading. This says, girls from Compton don't play tennis, they own it. But this idea of them featuring a lot of Black athletes in context of other athletes as well, but them seeing themselves, not just themselves, but people who authentically show up at themselves and talking about what their stories are.
And kind of a rags to riches stories kind of case, in talking about their struggles. But this campaign did extraordinarily well. Won the Grand Prix, probably at the Cannes Creative Festival, earned $163 million worth of media, added $6 billion of value to the Nike brand, and boosted sales by 31%. When you get it right with Black people, you get it right with mainstream.
Yeah, and I think this brand also does such a great job, not just in their advertising, right? So their advertising works because they do the rest of the other things. Everyone can't do this advertising, right? Wimbledon tries to do this ad, it won't lay the same way, and it's because they're doing these other three things. So that's what we try to stress. If you really want to connect authentically, don't just come at the end with the ad. You actually have to do a little bit of the work and the thought and the...
Yes, they have a relationship and they have equity with the Black community.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Finally,
Okay, expanding the opportunity. Okay, so when we talk a little bit about, okay, so what can you do like next? How do we think about this? And particularly about your gap. So the first thing I would always say is find out what your gap is, because probably a lot of brands or companies, or if you have clients, help them figure out what that gap is. That helps you figure out what this is actually worth and help you figure that out for your business. We say begin with why. We always talk about identifying, and I always talk about it from the standpoint of this is a relationship. So in a relationship, you got to know what you want, what you bring to the table, what's important to you, so that you find the right partner. Black people are not monolithic. You've got to find the right consumers that will help you close that gap, but also fit with your brand. So when you talk about the things that are important, it actually does. It's authentic because it truly is authentic.
And I
right?
think, too, beginning with why is about being introspective, too. We have to tell the truth about our audience. We have to tell the real truth about our audience and be, even though it makes us uncomfortable, but we have to be introspective and ask ourselves some questions. Why is the Black community doing this?
Yeah.
Why does the Black community believe this? Why, on just beginning with why and understanding that and being introspective and having the courage to tell the truth will help you develop strategies for a better connection.
Exactly, yeah. And we talked about this idea of finding those opportunities and then investing where in Black consumer research, where it makes sense, because it doesn't always make sense to do this for every single case. If you want to know if you need to do blue or purple on your packaging, you could probably just ask a group of people. But if you want to understand what packaging speaks to them and why, and how do you develop something that authentically connects, you really do want to have that research. We talked a little bit about the fact that there is a difference in how Black consumers will behave in research when they are one of a minority versus when they are the majority. There's also a difference between how Black consumers will behave when the person that is considered in the position of power, like the moderator, looks a certain way versus when they don't. Those are just code switching things that happen. So at least being aware of that so you understand what that looks like in your analysis is important.
And I think, too, when we talk about designated Black research, it's just never enough done. I spoke with many of the vendors here, and it's wonderful. One of the things that I love about the market research industry is that they have a welcoming message, like welcoming us today to tell the Black story. One of the challenges is not doing enough Black consumer research has a tremendous impact on the biases in automatic artificial intelligence, on AI. So if not enough of these vendors have enough Black panels, if they don't have enough research that is performed, we're going to see more biases in AI. So it's really, really important to make sure that you're investing a lot more in Black designated research.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the final point here on the diversity of teams and why that matters. Like, we get a number, we see a statistic, and our brain automatically wants to figure out why that is. If you don't have a gut for that consumer, then the whys in which you are developing, whether you know it or not, are based on some kind of unconscious bias that you have. And that's always the risk that we have as researchers.
Yes.
So the more that you do research, the more you develop a gut for that. The same you do a gut for new moms or, it's millennials, et cetera. So that's why it's so critical, because there are so many other places in this world that are feeding us biases related to race that we don't often identify or know of, that it can become dangerous, particularly if you are on teams that don't look like the people in which you are creating these insights about. And those stories are the stories that then marketers and advertisers are using to be able to create some of the things that we saw here today.
Right. So people always ask me can a white person moderate a Black group? Absolutely. But as Dawn was saying, it's best to have Black people on your team. One of the things that we do is to invite Black people to be Black in the focus group setting. Because 9 times out of 10, they're recruited by somebody non-Black, they're greeted by somebody non-Black. And so they tell the truth, but they don't always tell the whole truth. Yeah. So that's really important. But as a white moderator moderating a Black group, you tell your truth and say, hey, I don't understand you, talk to me, and tell, this is a safe space.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we had so much that we wanted to tell y'all. I'm thankful we were fighting about this. So if there are other questions, if there are other ways that we can help, we can go through all those blind spots, go through that framework in more detail, et cetera. Please come see us, because I think they're about to tell us we're out of time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's okay.
Great. Yeah, we do have questions for you, but we don't have time. So please do find these ladies off stage and talk to them. They both have a lot of great things to share with you. Thank you both so much for the presentation.
So